I adore the Fate franchise. Out of all the Japanese media I've gotten into over the years, not one of them has completely captured my imagination and hyperfixation quite like Type Moon's magnum opus turned cash cow. There are over a dozen Fate storylines across all of the different routes, alternate timelines, and parallel universes, with quite a bit of variance in quality between them. Some Fate stories are fundamentally flawed and painful to sit through, while others are complete masterclasses in narrative flow and world building. Still, for all of the mediums that Fate has found its way into, the most publicly available are still the anime adaptations. So I figure, may as well rank them all. For the purposes of this video, I'm excluding other Type Moon projects that don't fall under the Fate name specifically, so no Mahotsukai, Tsukihime, or Kar no Kyokai. There are technically 2 exceptions to this, but I think they should be on this list regardless. You'll see what I mean when we get to them. Also, I'm only ranking the anime adaptations, not the original works, so no Hollow Ataraxia, CCC, FGO manga adaptations, things like that. I'm just factoring how good the anime is on its own, not necessarily how good of an adaptation it is, though that is a factor. Final rule, I'm counting all first and second seasons as the same series. I'm going to separate the films as different adaptations because I think that's reasonable, but I'll make references to where they continue to build where it makes sense. It really just applies to one thing, but screw it, it's my list, it's my rules, I'm going to do what I want. Enough preamble. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get this thing started. I am the Dino, and this is every single Fate franchise anime ranked. Out of all the shows I had yet to watch before I started making this ranking, the one I was dreading the most was definitely Prisma Ilia. And yeah, it's entirely due to its reputation. Still, I told myself I'd go into the series as unbiased as possible to give it as fair of a shot as possible. I was at least going to see if it really was as bad as people made it sound like, and the result... I f***ing hate this show. Let me be as fair as possible. The concept of class cards are a decently fun spin on the traditional Holy Grail War format, and even the concept of servants and heroic spirits in general. Having the 7 class cards be the 7 MacGuffins that our heroes need to collect is a spin that's easy for Fate fans to follow, while also working as its own standalone idea. Seeing some of these characters that previously had very little screen time in Stay Night or in other Fate works is another aspect that is generally well done. Seeing more of Bizette, Karen, Luvia, Stella, and Lazerit is pretty neat. The art style is whatever, but the animation quality by and large is pretty good. Silverlink is an underrated studio, so seeing the animators and production staff be rewarded for their work is nice to see. I'm always down to give props where they're earned, but man, there are things that made this watch through unbearable at times. The fact that there's this much fan service in a show starring literal children is legitimately disgusting, to the point where it overshadows any aspect of the show that I actually do like. If these characters were young adults, I wouldn't mind it as much. I'd still find it weird, but ultimately it would be pretty harmless. But since the biggest targets of these sexualized aspects are children, it crosses the line into completely unacceptable territory. I haven't felt this gross watching a show in so goddamn long, and honestly most of it does come from Kuro. Chloe is another neat concept in this series, being the Emiya to Ilya's Shiro.
They rhyme.
But she's also the one who initiates a lot of the worst lollybait moments in the series. The infamous clip of her make out with Miyu is just the tip of the iceberg. Her design is far and away the most uncomfortably sexualized in the entire series, with the sparse covering of sensitive areas and the whole belly button tattoo blood thing. She's admittedly a deeper and more nuanced character than just that one clip, but it's hard to actively want to defend her writing when she is the way she is. Need I bring up every single time she's had to replenish her mana by making out with Ilya, and that's a canon reason for why that has to happen, and for why we need to have all of this weird bullshit here? Yeah, that's very cool. Every explanation for why she does the whole kissing and weird flirty sex things are all just excuses to turn the show into even bigger lollybait than it already was. I've used that term a lot, haven't I? There's a distinction I'd like to make between a show featuring child characters and a show that flaunts them. The worst part about this series is that it generally does fall into the first category a decent amount of the time. There are plenty of innocent crushes and playful banter that make the characters fun a solid 70% of the time. Literally, if it just used different outfits and camera angles, it would be fine. But I'm sorry, it's just way too gross, way too often for a show starring children. There are multiple ideas and elements of a great show at almost every level in this series. Maybe if a re-edit that cut out as much of the gross lolly shit as possible existed, it would be better. Hell, I have little doubt that the manga this is based on is infinitely better, but as an anime series, this is one of the hardest watches I've personally ever experienced. The good stuff is genuinely great, but it gets dragged down way too hard and way too often by all of the shit you already know about. I feel like I need a shower, especially after watching any of Second Hurts. I'll be back.
Strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
Oh god, this one hurts. The mobile game Fate Grand Order famously has a very bad narrative until the sixth singularity, known as Camelot. When I heard it was getting an adaptation after the seventh singularity, Babylonia, I was nervous for how that would even work. Then when I saw it was going to be a two-part movie project, I got even more worried that they'd cut out too much of what made my favorite singularity so great. Turns out, I was right. These films are bad. Not only is the characterization subpar, but the pacing feels way too rushed, the cuts made to the story undermine a lot of the emotional weight, and the animation isn't even pretty enough to make up for it. The biggest problem with any sort of early FGO adaptation is that Gudao just isn't a great character yet. As the player insert character, there's supposed to be a relatively blank slate for me, the real, actual me, to use for wish fulfillment. This obviously doesn't translate to an independent anime adaptation, so one would expect Ritsuka Fujimaru to have a little bit more personality and agency, but in this film, that isn't the case. Ritsuka in Camelot is just boring and unmemorable. There isn't a single scene that he is in that he makes better. You can argue the same thing for the game version as well, but I expect way less out of mobile Fujimaru than I should out of movie Fujimaru. The same can sadly also be said for Bedivere, who just so happens to be in my top 3 favorite servants in the entire franchise. In the game, he's an ungodly loyal and determined yet pessimistic and self-loathing knight. He's true to his king, but he isn't afraid of standing up for what he believes to be right. Hell, that's the entire emotional core of Camelot as a story. In these films, we never get to see the full spread of his personality. He remains a one-note sword dude who just has 2 expressions, bored and determined. He always ends up jobbing in his fights too, which makes him less believable as a sort of insurgent hero. Again, you could argue this is similar in the mobile version, but at least the game does make a prominent effort to show the constant anguish he's in because of his arm taking its toll on him, while the film places way less emphasis on this. Neither movie gives a satisfying reason for why we should care about the fate of this weird silver swordsman other than the fact that he's the main character. The ultimate sin of these movies, however, is unfortunately the pacing. Too much happens way too fast, and too many characters are introduced way too quickly, meaning we don't get a chance to breathe as the audience. Just like Bedivere, if you don't know any of these characters ahead of time, you have no reason to like any of them or want any of them to succeed. What the hell is a Sanzong? Serenity who? Where the hell even is Tawara? Why is Ozymandias just Timu Gilgamesh? The things these films do well come with a massive asterisk. The only good fight is Mash versus Lancelot in the second film, but even that's underwhelming when compared to some of the TV action scenes. Mash's arc of learning who the man inside of her head is great on paper, but it's not executed well enough to carry either film. The one scene that works, like genuinely works, is Arash's sacrifice at the end of the first movie, and stop me if I've said this before, it's still better in the game. The problem with it is that we just don't have enough time to really get invested in Arash as a person like we do in the mobile game. So while it's a great moment, it still comes across as lesser than it could have been, which is the unfortunate summary of this duology. I don't really have a lot else that I want to say here. These films are just bad. They hurt my soul and I strongly dislike them, admittedly maybe a bit too much. I don't know, maybe you'll get value out of a sit through, but they're just so incredibly not for me. I don't know.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
As an Easter egg thing that shouldn't exist, Fate Prototype is really neat. As a full-blown anime, So for the IRL lore here, Prototype is based on the original concept for the original Fate Stay Night visual novel, which is really cool. It's fun to see the first few scripts for one of the most influential visual novels of the 2000s be given life like this. Hell, this idea would later turn into Fragments of Sky Silver, which is an audio drama that came out and is not in consideration for this list, but this spawned a whole other property here, and that's really, really cool that that exists. It's the novelty that makes it worth going up to and watching, but that's just it. isn't it? It's just a fun novelty. Like, Prototype is just a 12-minute short that's framed as a movie trailer. And like, it's a decent trailer, but that's all it is. Literally, other than the parallels to the Stay Night we all know and love, and being able to point at Protoku and say, holy shit, it's him! Prototype Kuko Lane! There's not a ton of tangible value here. Like, it's seriously hard to diss on Prototype because, well, it is just kind of cool that it's a real thing, but I struggle to say that it's anything more than just a kind of cool thing. It's a great little treat, don't get me wrong, but it's just not much more than that, sadly. Fate Grand Carnival is the third Type Moon Carnival, and it helps to prove the theory that nobody makes fun of Type Moon better than Type Moon. It's just a collection of comedy sketches featuring characters from FGO, including the female version of Ritsuko Fujimaru, MASH, Science of the Roundtable, Jalter, and so on. The skits range in quality from pretty funny to modestly chucklesome, which is pretty on par for the course for honestly all of the Type Moon phantasms. The best thing I can say about this series is that it gives us more Ereshkigal, and as an Eresh stan, that's always a good thing. Her sketch where she becomes a YouTuber is just very funny. Her banter with Osakabe Hime is great, and it really does draw out the written side of her personality a little bit more. Where it falls short is that, well, that's the apex of the series now, isn't it? I just don't love the cast selection for Grand Carnival as much as the original Fate Stay Night cast, which means that a lot of the sketches here just don't draw me in as much. I love Jalter, Eresh, MASH, but I couldn't care less about the Chaldea Children's Squad, Red Hair, and honestly, even female Fujimaru. Like, she's funny, but I just don't care. At the very least, this cast just pales in comparison to the original 7 servants and masters from Stay Night, and that's what made the Fate side of the original Carnival Phantasm so good. Honestly, like a few other series on this list, there's just not a whole lot to talk about with Grand Carnival. There aren't as many great bits like there are with the original Phantasm, but the bits that do land hit pretty well. It's a 5 out of 10 comedy that does its job and does it well enough. There's just not a lot else to it.
Why can't I move my mouth? Is this an internal dialogue? I can't see the end of the horizon. Hatsune Miku!
This will be higher in the future. I repeat, this will absolutely be ranked higher once at least a full season of Fate Strange Fake comes out and is watchable. It is already too good and too cool of a concept to be in the bottom 5. As it stands right now, I just can't bring myself to rank it above an already completed and good series. Like, if the Strange Fake anime is even half as good as the manga adaptation, it'll rank tremendously high the next time I ever make a list like this. Hell, after 2 episodes, I'm already comfortable saying it has one of the best pilots for any Fate series to date. But for now, it has 2 episodes out, so it's gonna remain in the Shadow Realm for a bit. I'll talk about it again when the rest comes out. And that's it.
I have destroyed an opera house!
We're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu. That's right. We're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving.
For what it is, First Order isn't bad, but it's also nothing really special. It's a fun made-for-TV movie that serves as an intro into the premise of FGO for audiences who may have never played the original game, but it's also not a spectacular starting point to the story either. That does admittedly come mostly from the source material, but I digress. One thing I will absolutely give it is that it does work as a wholly standalone story, down to the character writing and story structure. The cuts that it makes work because Fuyuki isn't that dense with critical information anyways, and the plot overall is almost tailor-made to work as a shorter film like this. Fujimaru here works way better than he does in Camelot. He's a complete straight man that gets thrown into the world of heroic spirits and mages, and shit that he's just clearly unqualified for, which is the perfect way to introduce a lot of the rules of Chaldea to the audience as well. The cast he has to bounce off of is also moderately fun, and I like seeing everybody interact with each other, especially Ritsuka and MASH. More so than any of the anime so far, First Order paints Ritsuka and MASH as 2 trauma-bonded teenagers that slowly begin to nurture such a sweet and charming relationship. The way he holds her hand before they race shift to Fuyuki is actually really sweet, and their hug at the end is very cute. I like it a lot. And then Romani's has to interrupt them because he's the GOAT, and I love it. The cast is unfortunately a little bit better in a later FGO anime, so we don't get to see the full might of their power just yet, but that's kind of something that you expect by the nature of this being the introduction film. Like, even though I do give praise to Ritsuka and MASH, I will tell you straight up they're way better in Solomon and Babylonia, but as an introduction to who these two characters are, they're not too bad yet, and honestly, there's a lot of room for them to grow, and that's fine enough. I'd say the only character here that we get introduced to that I explicitly dislike is Olga Marie. I've just never been an Olga fan, and I really don't like her screaming when she gets absorbed by the sun. She does not pass the vibe test. Maybe Lost Belt 7 will change it, but for now, nope. The plot is, like I said earlier, pretty unremarkable. It isn't a bad story, it's just very simple. New man in new place go boom, wake up in new place, go to other new place, fight evil sword woman, it was Green Hatman all along, now we must collect all the cups and bring peace to the 9 realms, or something. It's unremarkable and not particularly groundbreaking, but that's more a criticism with Fuyuki from the game than Fuyuki in the movie. It's fine for what it is. The biggest reason I'd say to watch this movie at all is if you plan on watching Babylonia at all. It explains a ton of how Chaldea is supposed to function, and it helps make things make a lot more sense before you dive into that series. It's a relatively short film as well, being under 2 hours, so it should be pretty easy to slot into a watch list. And I do really recommend giving it a watch if you're going to continue with FGO. At the very least, there are some cool fights with Casterku that are worth looking for on their own, and the Kyrie Light Suite is low-key one of the best tracks to ever come from a Fate anime. Overall, First Order is a fun little film. It's not one of the top-tier Fate stories, but it isn't trying to be. It's just neat and charming, and that's perfectly fine. It does what it does, it clocks in, it clocks out on time, it goes to work, it's a good blue-collar little film. Simple as that.
Ah, yes. A classic. Nero Claudius.
So, quick story. I binged all of Last Encore in a day because I was bored, and I then realized that I had seen all of the Fate anime besides only a couple. That binge then inspired me to watch the rest of them so I could then make this list and this video. Unfortunately for me, this included Prilia, so yeah. F*** you, Last Encore. Despite its rather infamous reputation, Fate Extra Last Encore really isn't that bad, but it is pretty far from anything I'd consider great. More than any other thing on this list, it suffers from should have read the original material syndrome. Despite being marketed as an adaptation of Fate Extra, it's effectively a sequel to a hypothetical bad ending. This has led to a ton of confusion for new viewers who may not know what they're getting into. So trust me when I tell you this, play the original game first, then come watch this. If you don't, then you won't understand anything about the Moon Cell or the 6 floors our party has to go through before they can fight and kill God. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say 6? Well, it's actually 7 because we literally had to do one of them off screen and then write it off as a joke. In a 13-episode runtime, we're given 2 episodes per floor to meet the threat, see our heroes maybe interact with them, then fight and kill them in order to move on. So yeah, they literally had to skip an entire floor in order to fit its time budget. This type of writing can feel like a slap in the face to the audience if not handled carefully, and can also work to actively lower the legitimacy of our heroes. Speaking of our heroes, only one of them is actually worth half a damn. Hell, only 2 characters in this entire show are actually good. Alice is far and away the best antagonist of the week, and I can safely say that after watching the series, I finally get Nero. She's just so fun and bubbly and energetic, while also having her own dramatic weight and emotional core whenever she wants or needs to. She's just fantastic, and she steals the show every single time she's on screen. The animation is nothing special, though the music is pretty good, so there's that. This one shot of Nero at the end of the OP goes unreasonably hard, and it lives in my head rent-free, though that's really the only thing worth mentioning about it. I will say the style change during the Alice episodes, where it goes from being a middling standard anime aesthetic into a genuinely very interesting Madoka-esque fairy tale land, is really cool. Creativity like this shows that there is potential with the bones of this story to be unique and be memorable, but it ultimately falls short of that goal as well. It isn't horribly offensive to the eyes, but it doesn't leave any real impact either. For better and for worse, Last Encore definitely feels like a Shaft anime. Make of that what you will. Overall, even though I'm mean towards this show, I still did like it, and I'd honestly recommend it if you've played the OG Fate Extra. As a standalone, it's very bleh, but it does enough well that, yeah, it's worth checking out. Especially those 2 Alice episodes. Seriously, I love that mini arc so much. If the rest of this series lived up to that standard, then it would have been worth recommending regardless. As it stands, it's a cool what if that requires previous knowledge of Fate Extra to hit. Moving on.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Despite being ranked well into the middle third of this list, I think the FGO Solomon movie might be the entry on this list I have the least strong feelings about, be they positive or negative. It just kinda exists, does what's asked of it, and then ends. Unlike the game, I wasn't particularly emotionally invested in any of the goings-on of the film, even though I do consider it to be a well-made and faithful adaptation. Taking place after Babylonia, Solomon is the official ending of Part 1 of Fate Grand Order, and it's more or less an equivalent to the portal scene of Avengers Endgame. There's a moment where Jean d'Arc literally does the whole Avengers Assemble speech before we see literally every single tournament we've met up until this point, helping us take down the big bad evil of humanity. I know there are other things that happen in this film, particularly involving MASH and Dr. Roman, but the biggest selling point of the Solomon movie is the fact that it's a fan service film. Not fan service as in tits and ass, though there exists a fair share of that. These are Fate character designs after all. No, I mean fan service in that, hey, you know this character? Well, here's them doing a cool thing for 4 seconds. If you don't know who these characters are, you won't get any strong emotional reactions out of these moments. With that being said, there are some attributes to this movie that are genuinely very impressive. The animation quality is Cloverworks and Friends at their best, with several excellent tracking shots during the important fight scenes that match the peaks of Babylonia. The direction and sound design aren't particularly inspired, but they work to get across what the studios are trying to accomplish most of the time. The highlight of the film, to me, especially on rewatch, is Dr. Roman. Massive spoilers in 3, 2, 1. The completion of his personal arc and the reveal that he is Solomon is still one of my favorite moments in FGO. Ars Nova hits just as hard as when I read it all the way back in 2020, which is the highest compliment I can give. He went from being a character I liked in the game to one of the sleeper hits in Babylonia, and now to being the absolute shining, if fleeting, star of this story. Despite my praise for the things I like in this film, I'd be lying if I said I put any one aspect of this movie above anything else ranked above it. The animation is great, but it's not better than Heaven's Feel. The characters are good, but not better than Zero. The story is solid, but not better than No Thunder Snow. The emotional moments are good, but not better than UBW. The music is good, but not better than Apocrypha. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Solomon is a perfectly fine film, but it doesn't particularly excel in any one aspect. It's a jack of all trades that pales in comparison to basically everything else. Even though I consider it to be a good film, and even though I do overall like it, I don't find it to be that worth going out of your way for. If you've seen Babylonia and you want to see how it all ends, then it's a good conclusion to the Singularity era of FGO. But if you have no experience with Grand Order, then it's perfectly skippable too. It's fine and good and ultimately harmless. If nothing else, it's a fitting conclusion to the FGO anime. And honestly, that's enough.
Would you rather have unlimited bacon and no blades, or blades, unlimited blades, but no blades?
Out of everything I hadn't seen before I started making this list, I was shocked at how much I kinda loved the Studio Dean film adaptation of Unlimited Bladeworks. It's by no means a great adaptation of the route from the visual novel, but especially considering both when it released and what the expectations for it were on release, god damn is it better than what I was expecting. Released in 2010, animated by Studio Dean, this movie was a sort of sequel to the original 2006 Fate Stay Night anime. It was implied that audiences who went to go see this movie were familiar with the Stay Night cast, at least from the television series. As such, it kind of skips over character introductions and setup and just jumps straight into where the differences between Fate and UBW start. The first difference you might notice from Dean Stay Night to Unlimited Dean Works is, holy hell, the animation is smooth! Yeah, the animation on Unlimited Dean Works doesn't get nearly enough love from Fate fans. Not only does everything look extremely refined and polished, but the choreography in almost all of the action scenes is turned all the way up to 11. I still think that the ufotable action set pieces are more technically impressive, but especially given the time gap between these adaptations, I really do adore how well the fight scenes hold up here. In particular, the Berserker vs. Saber and Archer fight and the Archer vs. Shiro fights are shockingly well handled. What they lack in Ufotable's cinematography, they make up for with pure model work. To put it plainly, these fights feel more like real fights and less like symbolic character moments. Pick your poison, both are fantastic. I won't say that the animation here is perfect, however. If you know what you're looking for, you can very easily tell the shots that they use to try to keep the budget lower, namely a lot of the distance shots with still backgrounds, but they're mostly far and few in between, so they blend in pretty well. The biggest problem with the UBW film, honestly, is the fact that it's even a film in the first place. Ufotable showed us that this story almost requires a full-length anime TV adaptation in order to cover everything that needs to be covered, and cutting that all the way down to less than 2 hours really doesn't do this story justice. A lot of key plot points are greatly condensed if they're even shown at all. It still hits the absolute spark notes plot points fine, such as Archer's betrayal, Shiro's internal conflict against his future self, and Gilgamesh's rise to prominence, but the pacing is just lightning fast. Saber gets next to no screen time, and even Ren's arc is cut down from what it was in the Ufotable version. For all of my critiquing, however, I will distinctly say that I actually really liked how they handled Lancer in this film. He was already great in the visual novel and unlimited budget works, but his big climactic moment in the Einsborn Castle is debatably better in this version. There's definitely an appeal to just gently poking Shinji to get him to f*** off, but I really prefer just yeeting Gable at him instead. Q in this film is a king, and I love him. Overall, it's hard to call this anything more than a flawed experiment of a film, but I cannot stress enough how much I loved it overall. Much like Dean Stay Night, there's just this odd charm that I can't ignore. It has a very earnest quality to it that makes it hard to hate. I will repeat that this is absolutely not a great starting point for the Greater Fate franchise, but it does work as a unique, abridged retelling of Unlimited Bladeworks. Not that abridged retelling of Unlimited Bladeworks.
A symphony of crackle. Only great bread sounds this way. Let's hear yours.
I think by this point, almost all of the popular complaints about Apocrypha have been made. It's certainly far from a perfect series, but I'd like to raise some defenses for it that maybe don't get enough credit. Let me first acknowledge that this series has two major flaws: its characters and its pacing. It's no secret that Apocrypha has way too many characters for its runtime, with most of them ending up as one-note walking tropes instead of well-realized characters. While we do get to know some of this cast a lot better as the series goes on, we still don't get to see enough interactions between them like we do for most of the other franchises. This makes them stand out less and makes them less memorable and interesting as a total ensemble. Even the characters that we do get to see a decent bit of the time are ultimately less fleshed out than what they probably should have been. I'm not the biggest fan of Amakusa or Semiramis because they don't do anything particularly interesting besides just be evil. Their backstories are fine as written, but neither of them have a strong enough of personality to help them stand above any of the other villains in the franchise. Where the show does excel is its animation, particularly in regards to its fight choreography. I may get some flack from the Ufotable stands, but I would genuinely argue that pound for pound, the action sequences in Apocrypha are better than the ones in Zero, UBW, and even Heaven's Feel. Mordred and Kairi versus the Golems, Sieg and Astolfo versus Karna, and Sieg versus Amakusa are all excellent, but the pinnacle of a well-directed hand-to-hand fight in this series is absolutely Achilles versus Chiron. I absolutely adore this fight, and I implore you to go out of your way to find it. Even as a standalone scene, it holds up as one of the best in the entire franchise. On the topic of the more technical aspects of an anime production, Fate Apocrypha also has one of the most underrated soundtracks in the entire franchise. While I don't particularly love either OP or ED, there are several background songs that I absolutely adore. The titular Fate Apocrypha is an excellent driving melody that captures the vibe of a European Holy Grail war perfectly, with its emphasis on strings and pounding drums, whereas Necromancer is a laid-back coffeehouse jazz number that stands out by fitting into the background of its scenes perfectly. Far and away the most iconic song from this series, though, is Mordred's theme, Night of Rebellion, which stands as one of the franchise's best ever songs. Easily my favorite character theme in the franchise. Speaking of Mordred, she herself performs one of the greatest carry jobs I've ever seen in an anime. Not only is she the best written character in this show, beating out both Jean and Astolfo for that honor, but she's one of the greatest side characters in anime history. Yes, side characters. Despite the early episodes focusing on her and her master Kairi, she ends up taking a backseat to the homunculus Sieg. And while I can understand what they were going for by making him the actual main character, Mordred still does everything in her power to steal literally every single scene that she's in. She nails the tomboy aesthetic and character perfectly, being tough as nails and cocky while also being surprisingly emotional and endearing. She gets a great character arc partnered with Kyrie, where they both end up filling a hole in each other's hearts. She wants to be king and he wants an heir, but what they both really want is a father and a daughter, so they end up complementing each other in several ways perfectly. Her fight against Semiramis is one of the more iconic in the series as well, and for good reason. The aftermath after the fight is a really heartfelt moment, with both Mo and Kyrie saying goodbye and sharing a cigarette as they fade away. It's short, sweet, and an absolutely wonderful way to bring both of their character arcs to a conclusion. I think my biggest personal criticism for Apocrypha is that it should have had a full extra core in order to flesh out all of the details it wanted to. The cast has the potential to be an all-time great, as does this story, but neither get enough time to really flesh themselves out. When I first watched it, I had this realization that, yeah, Apocrypha isn't perfect, but I could tell that everyone involved was trying their best to make this a series worth watching. There's just enough scruff and roughness in the production that it ends up feeling more genuine. That's definitely something you're going to realize as we get further into this list. I value charm and enjoyment very high in my rankings. Sometimes a show that ends up being technically excellent just doesn't grab my attention, while a series that is flawed yet earnest ends up being more enjoyable for me. Apocrypha is in many ways the epitome of that. It's flawed to all hell and probably should be at least a spot or two lower, but I'm sorry man, I just really liked my time with this series. I fully understand that others haven't and are very outspoken about that, but APOC is just really fun, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't.
Come here, you. It's raw. It's fucking raw. It's real. Okay.
It's so funny to me that I can look at every single series on this list and definitively say this is the one that signifies we're at the stuff that is all universally considered good. The Fate cooking show is where it all gets good. Let the humor of that sentence sink in, it's very funny. Yeah, Emi no Gohan kinda rules. It has the same appeal as friendships in Mortal Kombat, where seeing characters in a typically violent setting instead be really happy and friendly is oddly charming. There isn't a ton of depth in what the show is trying to accomplish, but it still ends up being really tightly written and, most importantly, fun. One of my favorite aspects of the show is that the recipes in every episode are legitimate recipes you can try at home. It's awesome. Learn how to cook. This is not a request, it's an order. A grand order. If you're a more serious fan of the franchise, you may be familiar with Hollow Ataraxia, but just in case you aren't, Fate Hollow Ataraxia is a sequel to the original Fate Stay Night visual novel that ends up splitting its read time in half, between being a slice of life and an excellent mystery thriller. Emi no Gohan is essentially the condensation of all of those slice of life scenes, which makes it really fun after having watched any of the Stay Night shows. Only here can you have Lancer and Archer team up to take on Shiro and Saber in a volleyball match. Only here can you see Archer get a part-time job at a cafe. Only here can you see Ryder and Sakura work together to make dinner for Shinji and have it not be vile and abhorrent. The entire appeal of this series is in its novelty, but it's a damn good novelty. You should already know who these characters are, so seeing a completely different side of them makes them even more endearing. I'll go on record now and say that Stay Night has my favorite cast in all of Fate, and honestly, stuff like this is a large part of why. Everybody is still perfectly in character, but since they aren't in a scenario where they have to kill each other over a magical cup, they can be themselves in a way more relaxed environment. They're great in a traditional Holy Grail war context, but this additional depth really cements just how fantastic all of the original servants and masters are. One other thing this series does incredibly well is, shockingly, its animation quality. You wouldn't expect a silly little cooking show to have such fluid animation, but Ufotable really went out of their way to make this one of the absolute prettiest Fate anime of all time. The more muted color palette lends itself very well to the low-stakes environment of this show, as do the adorable chibi character designs. Seriously, even Berserker looks friendly in this art style, which is so goddamn impressive. The aforementioned volleyball scene is moderately famous for showcasing just how hard Ufotable is willing to go for a show this non-consequential. They absolutely nail the fluidity of the movements, both before Archer and Lancer join, and even after it turns into a genuine fight scene. In the cooking show. And it's raw! I just love this series, man. Like a few other things on this list so far, it does exactly what it sets out to do. Unlike everything below it, it goes above and beyond the prompt and delivers a genuinely great experience. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get a season 2 of this series, which is a shame because there's still so much you can do with this concept. If by some grace we ever do manage to get one, I'll be the first in line to have whatever they cook up. It's really fun and well worth your time. Yup. Above multiple series with life and death connotations, multiple heroic sacrifices, and a goddamn salmon recipe, we have the original Carnival Phantasm. And honestly, there's an argument that this is too low. The biggest thing that sets the original 2009 festival ahead of Grand Carnival is the cast it uses. Like I mentioned before, the Fate Stay Night cast is so fun to see in situations like this because it's so atypical for them to be in these scenarios. Outside of Hollow Ataraxia, we rarely get to see everybody being ordinary and relaxed, but it isn't out of character for them to have this side to their character. We saw this idea in Emiya no Gohan, and it sure as hell also applies here. Where Emiya no Gohan focuses on the slice of life with comedy as a consequence, Carnival Phantasm goes balls to the wall with its insanity, and I love it very much. Not every sketch on the Fate side of things lands, but the hits absolutely sail out of the park. Berserker accidentally winning the Holy Grail War when he was sent out to go get batteries? Peak. Saber getting a job at a maid cafe? Peak. Castor being a closeted bisexual Saber simp, complete with Gunpla and Dojinshi probably? Peak. And the magnum opus of the series, far and away, the Holy Grail Grand Prix. You can honestly watch Phantasm as either the standalone sketches or as full episodes, but I implore you, find the Holy Grail Grand Prix. All of the different servants and masters end up with unique vehicles, all of which come with varying strengths and weaknesses. Rider gets a bicycle with cute little ET basket for Shinji, Assassin gets a truck that he can use to haul around his shrine gate, and my favorite, Ilia gets... This 10-minute bit is just so full of great gags and jokes that all amount to this being one of the greatest things Type Moon has ever produced. I also want to take some time to talk about Prisma Phantasm because it's genuinely pretty decent. I didn't include it as a standalone because I wasn't sure if it qualified as a regular Aprilia OVA or as a standalone series, and frankly, I can't be bothered to. But if I had to place it as its own thing, it would be probably right below Solomon. It's way better than Grand Carnival since there were multiple bits that got laughs out of me, but it's still far worse than the original. I don't really have a ton else that I want to say about this show. It's a great way to celebrate what Type Moon is while also taking the piss at some of the absurdity in its stories. It's equal parts fun and memorable, but put simply, it's a festival. And like any good festival, it's a damn good time.
And Kurt, we got the snow for you in Philly today. It's coming down in the city of brotherly love and a big game with a playoff feel.
Oath Under Snow is one of the most beloved films in the entire franchise. And yeah, I can definitely see why, but despite ranking it so high, I will say that I don't quite love it as much as everybody else does. Let's start with the undeniably great things first. The animation in this film is breathtaking. There are tons of memorable shots that complement a slightly more jaded take on the Aprilia art style in a way that feels very climactic. The score also works to complement its art direction. Maybe I'll do an Emiya theme ranking later, but I guarantee that this version of that theme would rank up there among the absolute top tiers. I never knew I wanted a guitar solo over the Emiya theme, but now that I have it, I'm glad that I do. The story as well serves as a sort of prequel to the events of Aprilia in a sense, though it isn't actually relevant until Third Drive, where we actually get to explore the Miyuverse in greater detail. If this is your introduction to this world and these characters, you get a completely different context to not only the alternate universe characters, but even Miyu herself, as well as her relationship with Lugia and Ilia. Her relationship with her adoptive brother is foreshadowed way back in the first part of Second Vi, so seeing it really get expanded upon here is really sweet and wholesome. The short scene where she uses the last of her wish-granting powers to sincerely ask to be Shiro's real sister before her eyes change to match his is just... God, I love this. Please give me more. It's a great emotional core for this film to really focus around, particularly in regards to how it handles Miyuverse Shiro. On that note, let's address one of the most popular aspects of this film. I don't love Miyuverse Shiro.
Squidward.
For the record, I don't hate him, but I don't hold him on the same pedestal that a lot of other Oath Under Snow viewers seem to. Like, I can totally understand his appeal. He's a much more serious take on the character, one who struggles with his ideal of becoming a real hero of justice when he realizes what that truly means. This is a version of Shiro who got to see Kiritsugu as the cold, detached man that was willing to sacrifice anything the mission required. As a result of that, he sees the flaw in the ideal he abandoned before he could truly adopt it as his own. So when he's faced with the choice, he chooses the one that is, on paper, selfish. He chooses to save his sister instead of humanity. In his own words, if that's what it means to be evil, then I'll gladly be evil. He's an excellent take on an alternate universe Shiro, but I can't fully accept him as anything other than that. Let me use a metaphor here. The comic book version of Steve Rogers' Captain America is another one of my all-time favorite characters. I can appreciate how the MCU tried to adapt the character, and he can be my favorite character in that universe, but he still falls short to the original Blue Boy Scout that I fell in love with. Some of the major character traits are similar, so I don't have a problem with them sharing the same name, but their arcs are so different that they aren't the same character. The comic version is the original, and the MCU version is a great copy. Funny enough, Shiro is the same to me. There's no reason that his copy can't surpass the original for some people, but to me, that just isn't true. The best thing I can say about Oath Under Snow is that it carries a ton of weight to lift both itself and Aprilia proper into a realm of watchability. I stand by my ranking of the main series at the very bottom of this list. Still, through all the slop and slog, I knew that this film was waiting for me on the horizon, and I was excited and eager to finally get to it. I don't know if I'd say it makes watching the entire series worthwhile, but damn did this film try its best. As a total package, Oath Under Snow is a great movie with a great take on a beloved character, and while that's fantastic, it isn't quite good enough to land in my top 5. Let me be forthright here. If taken in complete isolation from the rest of the franchise, Fate Zero is 100% the best Fate anime. The animation still holds up today. The score is one of the most legendary in the entire medium. The cast in isolation is iconic and legendary. The story in isolation is both easy to follow and gripping. This series is excellent and is without a doubt in my mind the closest Fate has ever come to a true 10 out of 10 production. So why, then, is it only number 5? Simple. This series isn't isolated. It's connected to any and all routes of Fate Stay Night, meaning it has to serve as a prequel to all of them, and as a prequel, it falls short in a few categories that don't matter if you aren't versed in this franchise. Like I emphasized, in isolation, this series is borderline flawless, but a few too many characters are too wonky, and a few plot points don't quite work when you take this as a part of a package. The most egregious thing I can point out is Saber, particularly after the King's Banquet scene. The King's Banquet is the name given to that one scene where Gilgamesh, Saber, and Ryder all share a drink of wine and discuss their philosophies on what it means to be a ruler. The way Urobuchi wrote it, Saber is essentially shaken out of her resolve by Ryder, who challenges her every ideal and forces his into the spotlight. To him, a king should lead by boisterous example, always serving himself to serve his people. I understand that sentiment, but I hate Artoria's reaction to it. She wouldn't entertain Iskandar's mentality. She would challenge his targeting remarks and his demeaning declarations. She would hold her ground and fight back against him. The Saber from Fate Stay Night would not accept Ryder's position, but the Saber in Fate Zero does. The single scene both shakes and shapes her entire character in all 3 Ufotable works. I don't have a problem with Saber being challenged, but I strongly dislike that she isn't as headstrong as she is in the original. Another character I have issues with is Kiritsugu, but it's way simpler than my distaste for Saber. Basically, I just disagree with his philosophy on justice, and I find him a bit too edgelordy. It makes sense with his backstory, don't get me wrong, but I never really bought into him nor liked him that much as a protagonist, except for when I was like 13, and then I grew up. I do think he makes for a really interesting and well-executed perpendicular to Kirei, but I don't love him as a main character. Hell, I'd actually go as far as to argue that the realest main character in Zero is the Murder Priest. Kirei Kotomine bloody damn rocks in this show. Seeing him come to realize his true self as Kiritsugu begins to lose sight of his is great writing, but it goes beyond that. He's a genuine threat in the scenes where he's hunting down both Irisveal and Maya, and his camaraderie with Gilgamesh is a great grounding point for the audience. And especially that scene where he stabs Tokyo-Omi in the back is just, so good. I can go on and on, but a lot of my gripes and compliments really do come down to the characters, so you know what? Lightning round. Welcome to Characters the Dino likes and dislikes in Fate Zero based on the wiki list.
Dislikes.
Hunterface, Canis, Scylla, Ui, Iskandar, all of his dudes, Hephaestion, Mithriles, Bucephalus, Eumenes, Norikata, Emiya, Kiritsugu, Saber, Kotone, list of minor characters.
Neutrals.
Fion, Aoi, Jean, Enkidu, Gawain, Geraint, Corny, Ilya, Lily, Rin, Lily, Zoken, Jubman, Maya, Ptolemy, Ugi, Odd, Natalia, Mordred, Guinevere.
Likes.
Bedivere, Normal Irie, Black Irie, Karia, Kirei, Sakura Lily, Diarmud, Lancelot, Gilderay, Brio from Streets, Jin from Tekken, Glenn and Martha from Mackenzie, Waver of Velvet, Bulls of Heaven, Shira Lily, Little Hassan, and Simon! While my own feelings on this series are mixed, I cannot dispute the fact that it is more than deserving of being in the top 5. Hell, it is absolutely the top tier of not only Fate anime, but arguably the medium in general. It's fantastic in just about every way, but my personal bias with this one is just too strong. It may be what I consider the best Fate series, but it doesn't make it the pinnacle of the franchise. In a roundabout way that doesn't really make sense, but it makes sense if you don't think about it. Just let me have this one, okay?
What about the multiple giant evil MILFs and the evil Clayman?
Far and away the best FGO adaptation is also one of the absolute best anime within the greater Fate franchise. Why no, Mal Reviewer, Babylonia does not fail on every level of storytelling, it's just a victim of a really weird adaptation plan by Cloverworks. For some reason, the FGO anime went from the Prelude chapter directly into the 7th Singularity with barely an episode 0 to explain what had happened in between those, and then we went back to chapter 6, and then we finally ended with Solomon. Even though Babylonia does admittedly have some similar problems as the rest of the FGO anime, I'll go to bat that these aspects aren't nearly as bad as you might think. Fujimaru still isn't an incredibly deep character, but he definitely does have a personality. We see him get tired and sarcastic, but we also see that he's been through a lot. Mash also isn't nearly the same character that you know from the game, but she still works well enough. Honestly, these two are hardly the reason to watch the show, however. While we do have some grade A clickbait in Ishtar and Reshkigal, and some of the other side characters are fun, the two characters that really excel in this series are Gilgamesh and Enki. Kingu. Yeah, let's start with that one. Kingu is a clone of Enkidu made by Tiamat to help her eliminate all current humans and replace them with her children. As the series progresses, however, Kingu begins to get visions of his life as Enkidu. Even though he doesn't share that exact same life, or hell, even those same memories, he slowly turns from a sadistic and overly cruel murderer into a hero, someone who's willing to sacrifice himself for the same humans he once tried to destroy. Part of it is due to our main heroes, part of it is due to his aforementioned memories that he inherited, but a majority of his development is due to one certain Golden King of Heroes. Or should I say, one hilariously overdressed disaster queer. The version of Gilgamesh we see is the one towards the end of his reign as the king and ruler of Uruk. Put plainly, he's grown up a lot. He's experienced losses and has already come to terms with the fact that he can't continue to live as a wholly selfish leader. He's stern and strict with his people because he has to be, but he's equally kind and considerate. He's still the same cocky Gilgamesh we all know and love, but he's a bit more refined and toned back. His speech where he inspires the people of Uruk before their imminent deaths at the hands of Tiamat is genuinely wonderful and one of the more breathtaking moments in this franchise. Speaking of, the one thing Babylonia undisputedly nails is its big climactic action set pieces. Seriously, even if you haven't seen any of the rest of the FGO anime, and even if you have no desire to do so, I am begging you to at least watch the Ushiwakamaru vs. Gorgon and Quetzalcoatl vs. Tiamat fights. While the latter is considered one of the greatest pieces of sound design and visual spectacle I have ever seen, the former is equally incredible as a showcase of must-see action direction. The one long shot of the plural riders running along and slashing through the snakes of Avengers' hair is absolutely cinematic. I'd go as far as to say that purely in terms of visual design, it's my favorite fight scene in this entire franchise. Funnily enough, the sound design and soundtrack in general might be some of the more underrated aspects of this series. Several scenes are enhanced by truly excellent audio booms and blasts, contrasted with sharp cuts to total silence, all with a fantastic driving score that features both several incredible original tracks, as well as one of the best remakes of Grand Battle we've ever heard. Perhaps my favorite song in this entire series, however, is honestly its opening. Phantom Joke by Union Square Garden is a fantastic song. You might recognize them as the same guys who did the Kekai Sensen ED, but this is easily my favorite track the band has produced. Something about the high-pitched guitar with the singer's vocal style really mixes well, and strangely fits this show perfectly. Both sets of visuals work incredibly well with the song as well, particularly the set from OP2. That shot of Eresh and Ishtar with the golden flower bed is really, really good, and honestly it is enough to set it just barely above the OP1 counterpart. Honestly, I could go on about what makes Babylonia so good, but I'll be completely forthright, a lot of why I love the show comes from a mix of my adoration of the hype and the characters. There's a reason that it's ranked above everything not named Fate Stay Night, including the one Fate Stay Night it scores above. It may not be absolutely peak fiction, but it's the peak of Fate Grand Order, and boy does that mountain tower above the rest.
His name is Dean. We like Dean.
Before I get started properly talking about the series, I want to address something quick. Why is this series so often referred to as Dean's Stay Night? Well, that's because it's easier to differentiate it by naming it after the studio that produced it, Studio Dean. Now, I fully acknowledge that this adaptation has a ton of flaws and things that people strongly dislike about it. The awkward animation, the general story and tone, and some of the characterization are all things I've seen critiqued in the past, but I'm honestly very willing to defend against most of these complaints. On the production side of things, there's a lot of really skewed and off-model shots that can get distracting, not to mention the weird CGI sex dragon, but a lot of these are made up for by how true to the source material the rest of the show ends up being. A lot of character poses and expressions are pulled straight from the VN, Shiro's magic circuits are used as a placeholder transition scene several times, and more than a few iconic CGs are directly translated into memorable stills in the series as well. Shots like the now legendary "Are You My Master?" to Saber holding Shiro after the first Gilgamesh fight, to the numerous times we see Camelot, there are several great shots that really work towards making this adaptation extremely charming if nothing else. A lot of people seem to get the idea that Fate is this really mature and dark story, but the reality is it's far from that. Since the beginning, Fate has had more than its fair share of comedic moments to balance out its more adult and serious subject matter. That's one expectation Zero sets that makes it harder to get into the rest of the franchise that, honestly, Studio Dean nailed. The tone is really well balanced between some truly Scooby-Doo bullshit and some genuinely great dramatic moments. The visual novel does get darker as it goes on, and the 2006 Fate Stay Night does a great job of being that more lighthearted introduction to the franchise. The characterization for the most part of the cast is actually very true to the original Fate route. Saber is distant and aloof for the first half of the series before she turns around and slowly resumes her emotions. Just like Ufotable series, she gets tons of both badass and adorable moments that makes her a true standout compared to the rest of the cast. Watching her get closer to Shiro is genuinely endearing, just like in the original novel. The scenes towards the end where they start to realize that they're in love with each other are so incredibly sweet. With no doubt, these two are the absolute best couple in the franchise. And yeah, let's talk about him too while we're here. Shiro is a very misunderstood character in the 06 adaptation. A lot of outside fans find him to be very one-note and boring, but even without the context of a diehard fan, I can honestly say that he's pretty damn okay here. They nail his goofier side while also showing how resolute he is in his ideals. He's feistier and more sarcastic than he is in either the Ufotable series, which gives him a ton more color and depth. People like to complain that he isn't as complex as Kiritsugu, but I could not disagree more. He's my selfless and suicidal hero of justice, and I love him very much. The rest of the cast is as well handled fairly well. My only real issue with this cast as a diehard is that I would have liked to see more of everybody, but that's the sacrifice you have to make when you turn a 60-hour visual novel into a 26-episode TV series. That does lead me into some of my other personal critiques. Some of the story decisions do have me scratching my head a bit, like how they tried to adapt the beginnings of Unlimited Bladeworks and even some parts of Heaven's Feel. This results in there being a lot of anime original content that technically qualifies as filler for the intended route, and as a result of that, the pacing does turn a decent bit middling, and it makes for some lackluster scenes and moments. I feel like if this show was maybe 6 episodes less or reallocated those 6 episodes, it would be a lot tighter, prettier, and overall better. To go back on that though, I actually do like quite a bit of this anime original stuff. I understand that they didn't think they would get another chance to adapt this visual novel, so they threw in a bunch of stuff to try to cover all of their bases, which doesn't work as terribly as you might think. It also ends up letting us see some interactions that we don't get to see in the original, like Castor abducting Sakura and forcing her to wear bondage gear. I'm not sure why they did that, but I won't complain. The number one thing this series does right though is be fun. When watching this show for the video, I realized that I haven't had this much fun watching a Fate anime in years. I was reminded of my love for the visual novel, my love for this franchise as a whole, my love for these characters and this story. I feel like it's incredibly important to remember where things started, both from a literal sense and a practical sense. This was the social genesis point for every Fate anime going forward, and honestly, it has more than earned its flowers. It's far from perfect, but I still love it. It maybe isn't an objective top 3, but it's top 3 for me. And just like the original novel, there are still 2 routes that maybe rank a little bit above it.
Would you rather have unlimited blades, but no bacon? Or
there's a ton I want to say about the 2014 Unlimited Bladeworks series that might or might not have already been said. But for the sake of keeping things brief, I want to tackle the biggest things I think Ufotable's take on UBW does well. For starters, Castor is maybe the most underrated antagonist in the entire franchise. While characters like Kirei and Gilgamesh rightly get a lot of publicity and praise for being memorable and well developed, I would argue that Medea is right up there with them. She's coy and sly while also being intimidating in her own unique way. She leans into her strengths and poses a very real threat to Shiro and Rin during the first 2/3 of the show. Her grand plan to win the Grail War is honestly solid, what with her taking over Fuyuki's Fey lines and even using the Rule Breaker to become Saber's master. Her defeat is satisfying, but her backstory being on the more sympathetic end also makes her one of the few antagonists in the series that you can genuinely see as a hero in their own right. Atsuko Tanaka delivered an all-time great performance to bring out the sultry and passionate side of her, while also being an absolute monster when necessary. She may not be as iconic as Joji Nakata as Kiriko Tamine, but she more than embodies the character. Rest in peace, Tanaka-san. I'd argue that the entire cast is done well, but if I had to limit my highlights to just one more, I'd be foolish to not give credit to Archer for being one of the best characters in the entire franchise. Even though it's less than subtle what his true identity is, the reveal that he's just Shiro from a future where he became a counter-guardian is handled very well. The mystery isn't fantastic, but the exploration into what it means to be a hero is. Seeing him stand against Shiro as the bad ending of his dream creates a great decision for his younger self. Even if you will suffer, even if you're destined to be betrayed and fall to ruin, is it still worth trying to save everybody you can? For Shiro, this isn't even a question, and seeing Archer be reminded of that during their duel is such a great scene. UBW does have more than a few things worth praising, but also has quite a lot that's worth critiquing. Even though I'm a staunch Shiro defender, I'll fully admit that he isn't given nearly the same level of development he has in the visual novel. A lot of it is due to him not having his internal monologue, which does wonders to recontextualize a lot of scenes between him and the heroines. In the game, the date with Rin and Saber is very much a look into how broken he is for thinking, I don't deserve any of this, but in the anime, it's just a cute slice of life scene for Rin and her harem. I still love that entire episode, don't get me wrong, but I'd be lying if I said it was particularly necessary. And yeah, that's about it. Everything else in this series is genuinely exceptional in my eyes. You all know just how good this animation is, but it extends past just being visual Sasuga and into the realm of genuinely very well directed television. Both of the premiere action scenes, Shiro vs. Archer and Shiro vs. Gilgamesh, are ripe with memorable sound design and iconic shots that stand toe-to-toe with some of the best in the medium. Tons of other scenes are framed well too, like the church scene after Archer's betrayal, the iconic front door scene, and basically any time Lancer's on screen. Enough people have talked about it in greater detail to the point where I don't think I need to explain too much about why the series is ranked this high. I fully understand why some people may not like it, especially coming after Zero, but it does so much so well that it's impossible to deny its placement. Hell, there's a very real argument that it should stand at the top of this list. And while I wouldn't blame anybody for placing it that high, we still have one more route to cover and one more adaptation to look at. I thought I knew what I wanted to say about this trilogy when I started making this list, but after multiple recordings and more than my fair share of rewrites, I don't think I can really capture what makes Heaven's Feel so special. I was originally just going to list all of the scenes that stuck out to me, but then I realized that was just 2 minutes of me talking about moments that I love without giving them the respect that they deserve. I guess the best place to start is with Sakura. Even though I am a bit of a Saber simp, it is 100% my true and honest opinion that Sakura Mato is the best heroine in all of Fate. Everything about her in this trilogy is foreshadowed in the other two routes, Dean's State notwithstanding, but seeing her finally take the center stage shines a new light on her that casts a shadow over all of her past scenes. Sakura's backstory is an incredibly tragic take on various forms of abuse. The reveal that she was given to the Matos by her father is heartbreaking. Ever since her youth, she was groomed to become the heir of the Mato clan, which led to her suffering in their basement as well as at the hands of her adoptive brother. She would silently suffer and pray that her blood sister would one day come and save her, but that never came to pass. She lived in constant neglect, physical torture, and depravity until she found her one shining light. Her relationship with Shiro highlights aspects of both of these characters that I adore. To Sakura, he's salvation. He represents her desire to be genuinely helpful while also offering her a place away from her hell of a home. To him, she's both a great friend as well as someone he has to protect. When he gets wrapped up in the Holy Grail War, he immediately decides that she's somebody who he has to personally shield, a desire that grows further and further when he realizes everything that she's been through. Their tender moment after the initial siege on the Einsborn Castle is the only time I've seen a genuinely necessary sex scene done well, because it's handled with complete and total respect. My favorite moment for these two, however, is the park scene in Lost Butterfly. It's the culmination of their relationship so far, with Shiro telling her straight up that she'll always have a place in his home, and Sakura opening herself up fully to her shield. Seeing just how low she thinks of herself is heartbreaking, and the shot where he embraces her and tells her he'll be the one to keep her safe and sane is just perfect. There's something so earnest in how Tomonori Sudo adapted this series. It's a bit messy, but you can tell where he put a lot of the care and attention. I'm not qualified at all to talk about how well or poorly they handled some of these sensitive subjects, but what I will say is that, based on some people I've spoken to, these films do a fantastic job at handling that subject matter with the proper maturity and respect it deserves. Take that for what it's worth, your mileage may vary. What I am qualified to talk about is how visually magnificent these films are. You'd expect a movie series from Ufotable to look excellent, see also Kara no Kyokai, but my god, there are scenes in all three films that push the envelope past any and all expectations. Lancer vs. Assassin, Salter vs. Berserker, and Rider vs. Salter are each deserving of praise for being incredibly well-directed action set pieces, but perhaps the most iconic single scene in the entire trilogy is 9 Lives Bladeworks' Shiro vs. Berserker. This scene is so genuinely perfect. It's Shiro fully embracing what he will become by fully connecting to Archer's arm. It's him putting every other concern aside to protect someone dear to him in Ilia. That shot where he breaks out of the green magic circuits is rivaled only by that shot of him finally running past Archer, who simply smiles as his younger self does what only he can. That moment where he projects Berserker's sword to take down the giant after seeing flashes of all of the 12 labors of Heracles, an anime original edition, mind you, is so good. The visual of a single bloody tear streaming down his face as he slays Berserker is iconic. Man, what else can I say? This scene is a visual spectacle, ripe with characterization, that makes it one of the best scenes in the entire franchise. Honestly, every character is at their best in this trilogy. I'll mention how Rin and Archer get more sides of their personalities shown that make them both more memorable and interesting, but the two biggest beneficiaries in this trilogy, outside of the main couple, are Ilia and Kire. While I'll admit that they aren't quite as deep as they are in the novel, they're both given a ton more spotlight in the third movie. Kire's full backstory that explains why he is the way that he is, and Ilya's grand sacrifice are both huge moments that make both of these characters even better than they already were. I could go on, but I think my favorite thing about these films is just how surreal it felt. I had to watch everything else on this list on my phone, PC, or TV, and I watched some of them with friends, but most of them I watched alone. While the first two films followed that same pattern, I had the pleasure of watching Spring Song in theaters. Once at the very end of 2020 when a local theater did a very limited capacity showing, and once about 6 months later at a different theater in a different town. And let me tell you, there's nothing like seeing the finale to your favorite storyline in all of fiction on the big screen. Flaws and all, it was special. And it ranks among my all-time favorite film experiences ever. If I was being as objective as possible with this ranking, the top 6 would look something like this. And yeah, that's a solid list, but it isn't my list. Fate Stay Night is my all-time favorite piece of fiction, and Heaven's Feel is my favorite story in that novel. Maybe some other series do things better. Maybe some other anime have had more impact on the medium, but I don't think any of them have made me feel the same things that all 3 Heaven's Feel movies have. I still tear up when I think about the ending. I still get hyped when any of the fight scene soundtracks play. Presage Flower, Lost Butterfly, and Spring Song are, to me, the absolute top tier of Fate. Other things may come close, and one day they may be surpassed. But for now, the bar has been set so high that I think they'll be at the top for a while to come. So, yeah, that's it. That's the list. Wasn't expecting this to be over an hour long. Cool. Well, yeah, if you liked the video, then go ahead and do the YouTube things. And if you didn't, leave a dislike and all of the hate comments so the algorithm can spread this video. I'd appreciate it. But no, for real, thank you very much, everyone, for sticking around watching through this video. It was a ton of work, and I just really appreciate everyone tuning in. So, yeah, this video was long. I'm going to go to bed now. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I am the Dino. Y'all take care of yourselves, and have a good one.
Would you rather have unlimited blades, but no bacon, or